Okay,
Okay.
all right. Hello everyone. I'm Michael Naylor, and I'm the director of the Maine Enneagram Center for Transformation and Well-Being. And today I have a dear friend, Pam Moore, who's going to share her unique journey as a Type 4, which, the sisterhood, brotherhood of Type 4 is a unique group, to say the least. And we're going to just start off, and I just want to say thanks for being here, Pam. It's really great to see you. And, you
It's
know,
great to
uh,
see you too.
yeah, we'll just invite you to share, your journey, the agony and the ecstasy, and everything in between, and what how you came to the Enneagram and all of that good stuff. So, anyway, just let it roll.
Okay. Um, let's see. How would I want to start my story? Like most fours, I feel like my story was a unique and difficult journey.
That's a good expression of it for sure. Yeah.
Um, I will start with this. I lost my mother in September. That was the last of my two parents that Um, and that's been a strange and interesting journey to suddenly be an orphan,
Hmm.
and even coming from so much dysfunction and chaos. And I really believe that's where fours, manifest from, is destruction and chaos, and we're kind of proud of it, right?
That's the rumor. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but I've been sober for um, 35 years, going on 36 years.
That's awesome.
It is. It is. Um, and so the way that I ended up coming to the Enneagram, really is through recovery. And I'm trying to think back. First, I will say, like it with being a four, when I went through a very chaotic childhood and a very abusive childhood, and all that, but also when I was using, I ended up, of course, doing everything to the extreme, as fours are tending to do. Um, and so I ended up homeless for a long time.
Hmm.
You know that.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, which ends up to be a very unique way of doing even the addiction path. Uh,
Hmm.
and I will tell you this, like in being a four and thinking back, when I was homeless, homeless people kind of tend to hang in gangs, for survival. And what we would do is, this was in Atlanta, we would find um, condemned houses, and just move into those, for shelter and stuff.
Yeah.
And being, I would decorate the house. And I think back on that because it was so insane. There would be a fire in the middle of the room for warmth, and I would be going and finding things outside and weaving them together so that we could have something beautiful on the wall.
Oh, that's how your art practice began. Sounds like, yeah, that's amazing. That is a unique approach to homelessness. I like that.
It really is.
Oh,
I was very focused on it too. So, uh,
yeah.
but that's part I had when I was trying to figure out, I like struggled. Am I a two or a four? Because I was a very unhealthy four when I first learned about the Enneagram. That's part of how I knew, was because even in such a dire situation, And the most important thing to me was to make it lovely.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I, for those who have got to go to your center or to your home, that all your artwork is, on all the four corners of the home, and it's really gorgeous and beautiful. So it's really interesting. Yeah. So how did you begin to tease out two-ness from fourness? Was that anything you could speak to?
Yeah, so when I got, well, at first I thought I was a two, to be honest, um, because I do have a lot of caretaker in me, and I
Hmm.
do have a lot of wanting to make life more comfortable for other people,
Hmm.
and I'm very good at it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but what helped me like distinguish between a four and a two, like I said, what I see is like I was a pretty unhealthy four. Um, uh, is the individualistic part. So even when I looked back on my recovery, like even when I first got sober, I never could do. Of course, it's 36 years ago, and there was only AA, so and CA and NA, all the A's.
Hmm.
And I did go to CA because it was cooler than AA
Oh.
for sure. But with that, like in my first 2 years of sobriety, I picked 9 sponsors, and all 9 of them got drunk.
Hmm.
I was the only one that didn't. But and you want to hear something interesting about that and picking sponsors? Because I quit after that, and I just used my therapist, which was the first part of my individualized treatment plan.
Hmm.
But I tried to do a sponsor again at 10 years and she got drunk. I tried to get 20 years, she got drunk. I
Wow.
tried again at 30 years and he got drunk.
Wow. Well, you got to witness how, regardless of how long somebody's sober, if they're not taking care of business, they can relapse.
Not only that, I had to really come and face like, what is it in me that's drawn to these people
Hmm.
that are on the edge,
Yeah.
and I think that is part of my unhealthy kind of caretaking part,
Hmm.
that I'm really in the end rescuing people
Yes.
that are looking good on the outside, but are obviously struggling very deeply on the inside.
Well, that's a really important point because there's sort of a storyline, a description about the four being someone who's always looking for a rescuer, but I've found in my life, I was the rescuer, and that sort of four going to two, and a lot of little fours as kids were really aware of the suffering in the family and drawn to saving the family. So that's an interesting thing because usually the story is, well, the four is always looking for a rescuer, which is a type two who comes to save them. But I've seen it happen the opposite way many times. So it sounds like that was, a true for you in a certain way.
And it certainly was, and I can see like the part of me waiting for a rescue also.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Definitely, and probably some even with these particular people,
Hmm.
that it was um, about things. But I have this theory that number one in family systems, that scapegoats are the ultimate rescuers
Oh, okay.
because they, stop
Yeah.
people from ever having to look at anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that they're willing to sacrifice their own life
Hmm. Hmm.
to save the rest of the family.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's certainly a story that resonates for me in terms of, the four often is the scapegoat or becomes it sooner or later because they just want to be unique and different. And what are you going to do? You're going to get scapegoat. But yeah, that's so. I think the other thing that just comes to mind is that one particular attribute doesn't define the type. That it's always a mixture of things. And
Mm.
I'm just noticing because there was a time in my life when I looked for a rescuer. They always failed me, of course, and then I had to, get on my own horse and rescue some people, and that didn't work either. So anyway, so when you think about the four patterns, you use the word unhealthy four. What are some of the qualities of the unhealthy four that you resonate with when you were in your early recovery or in the midst of your addiction?
Um, that running to rescue, and taking on the two energy for positively sure, but also that concept, because I think fours are like such amazing storytellers, sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. Uh,
It can go both ways.
it can go both ways. And I think when I'm like feeling really unhealthy, that's one of the ways that I really uh, can tell is because the tragic stories I'll create it in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes I'll know I'm making it up. I tell my husband and daughter, I don't know how many times I've had to kill them off so I could have their funeral. In my and then I can end up feeling so sorry for myself, and then
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh, I just made that up.
Well, it's good to notice because some fours don't. The story is it's like creating a movie. It's like, oh, this movie, and I was here and I was there, and oh, I'll add a little bit over here because this makes it more intense, and then the movie shows up again, and you just got to talk about it. So, yeah, I remember I remember when I was doing some training with Russ, and he says, type fours, if they would just shut up about telling their story all the time. And I thought, he said, that's a
But it's
person.
so interesting.
It is. I never get bored with it. Yeah. Well, have you had, the experience of sort of mood swings, like I'm feeling good and then I'm feeling low and then I'm feeling good, and people around you, partners, are going, what is the weather today? It seemed like it just changed in the last 3 seconds. Have you experienced that before?
I have, and but not that's not something that I struggle with that much right now. But certainly, and definitely in early recovery, um, because I can remember like just sitting. I can remember this time actually even sitting in class. I went to college, not back to college. I went to college when I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember sitting in class and there's absolutely nothing going on. And just I suddenly felt so suicidal. And then, I ran out the door and ran home and went to bed because it was so overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
And it really just struck me because there was no trauma or drama
Mm-hmm.
going on in my life at that time.
Yeah.
It just would come over me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, so, one of the things I know that I struggled with as a four, and I've heard this from a few others, this idea um, that I felt compelled to be emotionally honest uh, at all times, which meant that many times, or sometimes, I would be honest towards an audience that had no interest in it at all, right? But I just felt like I had to impress the deep suffering truth on people, and so that I had to learn a lesson about boundaries in terms of oversharing. You know, I just thought you told people the guts and horror of your story. That's just what healthy people do. And I can remember a therapist saying, "No, that's not a good idea. Why don't you just bring that to me instead of, you know, split?" And I would swamp people with, particularly my poor partners in the beginning. But did you have anything along those lines?
Oh, oh, so much so. I can remember when I was in the school of social work, and this is, back in the 80s. So it was during the multiple personality disorder. This is so insane. But I overshared about my story so much that they decided I was a multiple personality disorder.
Oh, it was a pretty popular label back then. Wait, like we've got one here. So how did you unpack that?
It's funny because it insulted me.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because back in the '80s, people would get thrown into therapy and given all sorts of drugs and had all the personality things deepened, and it turns out that it wasn't the best therapy or the best diagnosis. So I wondered if you dodged that bullet.
I did, and I did because I had an extraordinarily good therapist.
Awesome.
And so really my professors wanted me to be that. I always tell people, and I guess I do. I said, the person who was my first therapist, Tony, he died a few months back,
Hmm.
and over all these years we stayed in contact. But I tell you, he was like such an important person in my life because he was the first good man I ever met.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I didn't even know that there was such a thing as an honorable man
Hmm. Yeah.
until I met him. And when I had those nine, and he was not in recovery, he was just a good person.
Hmm.
And so when I had those nine sponsors that got drunk, actually, I did my 4 step with Tony, my therapist, and my
Oh,
bishop, because he was the only person I trusted.
yes.
And he, when they started telling me I was a multiple personality disorder, he was a very level headed person. Um, he would have probably been a one. He was a super organized and very level headed. And he just was like, I just don't see it, Pam. And he really, so he gave me something to hold on to,
It's awesome.
like a stability.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
When I
Awesome.
was very like,
Yeah. Well, it's
but
kind of.
let me tell you what happened with that though. Just about like four things. So he worked at a university. I was, of course, indigent care. So part of what they would do is you would do therapy in front of the glass mirrored wall, and
Yeah.
then they had a phone in there, and they would call like here and there. Not every
Wow.
time, but sometimes. So, and then he'd have to answer the phone and change whatever he was doing. So this crazy therapist started, this woman, she started saying that she thought we were too close and that it was unhealthy. And then because I was such a um, different and unique client, she wanted me.
Oh.
And so they made me stop seeing Tony and they put me with her. And actually, they did it in a very shaming kind of way, like there's something wrong here and you're
Hmm.
bad, and so there was a
Hmm.
lot of shame in it. And this is the thing I admire about Tony too, is he didn't buy into it.
Yeah.
He was just um And so he stayed in touch with me over the years and just, um, and we ended up like with a very nice, beautiful friendship
That's awesome.
years later.
Yeah.
And I think about that because it would have been so because I easily went with the shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was, certainly I was thinking in my own evolution as a recovering for that shame button was pretty deep and loud. And sometimes I compensated for it by being, at least in my imagination, more unique and superior and sensitive to all of these other dead emotional people around me, right? But it was a compensation around just feeling like there was something at my core that was really bad. And of course, I had enough experiences of shame as a little kid to kind of feed into that. But what was true for you around that, the theme of
well,
shame?
let me tell you about this with the speaking of shame. So this therapist who really did end up being mentally ill, she told me that I was so bad I needed an exorcism.
And
And I
what?
went and had one.
Well, how'd it go?
Well, this is actually it makes me laugh all the time to this day. But so you go and like you lay and they do all these prayers and oils and all that stuff. I mean, and nothing fucking happened. And I laid there for hours and I was very open. I'm a
Wow.
four. Like
Yeah. Let's
that would
give
have
it.
been the ultimate unit. And believe me, I was super, super open and nothing happened. And then she fired me because she was scared of me.
Didn't get rid of the devil. Oh my word. That's a very unique story. You probably have quite a few of them. You have to the story of unique experiences. We'll have to collaborate on a book. That would be very interesting. Wow, that's incredible. Uh, yeah, and so was that in the deep south that you got to do that exorcism?
Of
Oh,
course.
of course. Wow. Well, so in the course of some
But
of the
now I know those don't work. So
say that again.
so now I know like when people like say, I
Yeah.
wish I could just get this out of me, I'm like, hey, it doesn't really
I'm still got my inner critic here, so yeah. Oh my word, can't that's amazing. That's an amazing story. So I was just thinking, I've been in, AA like yourself a long, long time, and I can remember coming in to AA, and I'm always aware of the atmosphere of people trying to get you to conform to their spirituality, and thank God, AA had enough rebel spirit that the bottom line was take what you need and leave the rest, except believe everything I've just told you. Uh, and if you don't, you're doomed. And or things like, you know, um, the big book says, these are suggestions. Like the suggestion that when you jump out of an airplane, you pull the ripcord on your parachute, right? And that kind of stuff would always just like really trigger me. And so the whole sense of, here's a program. And then, there's always kind of, I've always thought of AA as representing both um, the Unitarian Universalists on the left and the dogmatic Southern Baptists on the right. There's just a whole mix. And getting a group that you're attuned to, it becomes a challenge because not all groups are healthy. And in a good meeting, something comes through that's smarter than everybody in the room, and thank God for that, right? But I wonder for you, how you navigated, AA and where you went. Because I remember in my year 5, I started into practice of Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and that was kind of like a heretic thing to talk about. And today, in meetings, talk about Pema Chodron a lot and other spiritual teachers, and it's not frowned on. But back in the day, that was like, don't bring in your Zen Buddhist practice. And I say, well, what's the 11th step? Oh, it's meditation. Anybody in this room meditate? No. I said, well, I'm just saying. So anyway, I wonder what comes up for you.
Well, when I quit going to meetings many, many years ago, and that was like the right choice for me.
Yeah.
Um, but down here in the South, AA is mostly like Southern Baptist religion.
Okay.
And I have always struggled, especially with Southern religion, and have found it pretty oppressive. And so I had this issue. I did it different with the sponsorship, which would upset people a lot, But I will tell you, like in working a program, when I say I worked a 4-step, I worked the AA 4-step, the NA 4-step, the Al Anon 4-step, the adult children of alcoholics 4-step. And I did like 5 of them, not one. And
yeah.
So I really look, I when I look at it, it's like I really worked hard at working the stuff, but I never was in sync with AA here, and and it got to when I was like probably 6 years sober. It got to where it started feeling very oppressive to me.
Yeah.
And plus being a female in AA, and I got sober young, like you did, and it was there's a lot of predatory behavior in there.
Absolutely.
And so I to this day, I'm not sure how healthy it is for women to be in co-ed meetings, especially young women.
Absolutely.
And so like in my practice, I always ask women if they're going to go to AA to go to women's meetings. And I like Smart Recovery because it's facilitator led, and there's just a little more accountability in it. And I have found in the Recovery Dharma meetings, they're a little younger and there's not as much of the predatory stuff.
Yeah.
And so I gear women away from co-ed AA.
That's smart, very smart. Yeah.
But when I was 6 years sober, another man came into my life. I have these really wonderfully sweet, healthy men of color that come into my life when I need them. So I don't know why it's always that way, but it is.
Yeah.
But I had this other man come into my life, Trevor. He was Jamaican, and he at that time had like he probably had around 30 years sober, and he had already left AA many, many years before. And he was very involved in his church, so I feel like he helped deprogram me.
Yeah.
And so we would meet, and I would tell him I'm going to relapse. If I don't go, it doesn't matter if it it doesn't feel right to me. I have to go because
all the fear.
Go,
all the fear.
And he would talk me through it, and really, I really do feel like it was like a deprogramming.
Yeah.
That he did with me, and we would have lunch. We'd have lunch every 2 weeks, and
yeah. Well, I feel grateful for the recovery that's here in Portland, Maine, because there's a spaciousness to it, and that dogmatic, fear-driven thing that if you don't do this, you're going to relapse, and sort of being scared of yourself all the time is a good thing, and blah blah blah. But I think there's been a lot of maturing here over the years, which is good, because I think that kind of message scares people away and creates mistrust, and doesn't contribute to a person feeling safe in exploring their recovery and addiction. Once and I know the intention is, well, as I notice, when someone gets sober, however they got sober, that becomes the rule for how everybody else should get sober. It's just like, and it's like, well, that's the only thing right? And in my recovery, I've explored, all sorts of spiritual processes, from Gurdjieff to Diamond Heart to Tibetan Zen Buddhism, Shambhala Buddhism, to whatever. Um, but not everybody does that. A lot of times people are scared, like I'm not supposed to go out of the bounds. But so for you, maybe it'd be great to hear about what has supported you in your growth and maturation as a type 4.
And I think it's changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one thing I do think about, like, if at 15 years I'm doing the same thing I was doing at 1 year, that's not really growth.
No. It means I'm getting rigid in my life.
So therapy, for one, has always been a big part of my process.
Yeah, me too.
And I have gone to different therapists and used different things. And so, of course, CA, since I was cooler, was the thing I did first, but in my own unique way. And cause without a sponsor, and with a therapist instead, and not working one 4-step, but working many.
You may have a Guinness record for most diverse 4 steps. Yeah.
And I did them all at one time.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah.
And art and journaling have always been a big part of, like, my personal growth. And when I think the first time I did anything with the Enneagram, it was probably like 25 years ago, and I didn't really take to it at first. It really, I don't know. I at first I found it very off-putting, and I felt like putting people in little blocks.
That's right.
How and I, being a 4, you're not going to put me in it.
That's right.
You're not going to fence me.
Yeah.
So I went to it, and then I went away from it. And I did I'm very interested in Jungian work, which I think really kind of melds with the Enneagram a lot.
I think so. Yeah.
And so I've always, like, interspersed, and I love shadow work and persona work, and I still am, like, discovering to this day more.
Yeah.
And how they interact with me. And then then I started doing a lot of women's work, and doing like book studies of different books with women. I did that for some years, and then when my daughter was young, I got very involved in doing Montessori work. And so I became a Sunday school Montessori teacher, which really, to me, is very appealing to a 4, because you are both creating, and it's unique and different, and there's this freedom of space in there.
Yeah.
Because with the thing about space, as a 4, I've noticed, like, anytime I don't like, whether it's physical space or emotional space, I need a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I feel like even with that Montessori work, I learned a lot about myself, and that it was a kind of growth, even though it wasn't traditional way of, like, this is how you do recovery.
Yeah.
It certainly, was for me.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly resonates. Journaling was really important for me as a four because if I didn't, one of the stories we have is fours really absorb the impressions of life around them. If they don't get it out somewhere on the page or in their art, they get a little bit crazy internally, and it gets congested in here. And so that was really super important for me. And I think the other thing has just been men's work and really, learning to trust and find really healthy men who could support me. Because as a type four, there's a way it felt like my male energy was kind of distant. And it wasn't until really getting nurturing and loving connection with men that I really start to feel that kind of fill in. So that resonates in the Jungian. I did years and years of Jungian therapy, and it really resonated with my complex and mysterious soul, and and was very healing. And so yeah. So if you were,
and
to
I'm still very much do a lot of dream work, and I do
yeah,
dream groups,
yeah,
and um so and I did end up, as you know, coming back around to the Enneagram, really like in a time of crisis.
yeah, yeah,
um
yeah, yeah. Well, so if you were, looking back, sort of the overview of your journey, uh, what do you notice as being the was most challenging? That if you had more, I mean, this is a terrible question because I couldn't have used any more help than I got because I was in my own little world when I was going through my evolution, and I can remember just feeling like at some point like I may be the only person who knows what's going on the planet, and this is not a good situation. And it was such a powerful. There were certain. Well, of course, it was a delusion that I had to crash and burn many times, but there were some threads of truth to it. And but looking back over things, I think there were certain moments sometimes when understanding people arrives to kind of calm me down a bit. But if you were to look at the difficulties you experienced, let's say, adolescence through 30, um, what stands out to you as kind of the challenge of being a type four?
uh Feeling like I was all alone in the world,
Yeah, yeah,
and really, and I can still see little moments of that pop up in my life,
yeah,
and because I think fours is just very lonely
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and misunderstood, and
Yes, yeah. That kind of sense of no one gets me. I feel so alone with it. In which case, my mentor would say, "Yeah, you're really alone. One in nine people are having that same experience right now on the planet." But it's so compelling that because it lands in my body as a fact, right? It's like it's a fact. I'm alone and I'm looking out and going, "Oh my God." So I have that too. Every so often I may be at an AA meeting and suddenly that feeling will come over me and I'll go, "Oh, I haven't watched this movie for quite a long time. It's still pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm so alone." But it seems, over time I've gotten less taken by it, which is nice. But
Mhm.
it can still hit. So outsider alone, did you ever have that sense of there's something uniquely wrong about me or defective?
Oh, always,
Yeah,
always.
yeah,
Which my first memory, which is about when I'm two, is of shame
yeah,
and
yeah,
feeling dirty, and just,
yeah,
and it's really just sitting in the car and just feeling so dirty,
yeah,
which
yeah,
would just shame.
yeah, yeah. yeah, those, and it's, of course, in those days, there wasn't much conversation out loud about that that could help a little one. And I think we've come a little bit away, a little bit of growth in the right direction. So, so the other thing that's always interesting in my life, at least, is helping my partner deal with me.
Well, and that's actually, I will say, I think that's how the Enneagram has been the absolutely most helpful to me is
Mhm.
in my relationship with my husband.
Yeah,
Um, because he's a counterphobic six, and and being a four, like a lot of times, a lot of misunderstandings we've had in our relationship, really are about the difference in the way we view the world, and from how
yeah,
we come, and in some ways maybe too similar, because I find counterphobic sixes a lot like fours,
yeah.
and because they think they're unique too.
I don't
And
know. They just don't have it right yet, but that's okay. So, any particular themes that you could speak to?
um well, that was the sense of being misunderstood, because like with sixes, to understand, like they're all my husband, like what always would infuriate me is he would argue both sides of the problem. And so like he would argue one side, and I finally go, okay, I see it. And then he'd be like, no, that's not it.
Not done yet.
Yeah. and
Yeah,
uh, and to understand that that wasn't him being obstinate.
yeah, yeah. Just the pattern, his personality mechanics. Yeah, and well, sixes, counterphobics, or just the regular, a sense of preparing for the next catastrophe can be something that takes over their attention from time to time. So, any dynamics around that? Around?
Actually, I will tell you, I think I'm the prepper in our family,
Oh, okay.
but I always do it very creatively. Uh, you guys remember the Y2K?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I
I
do.
had I had like my bottles of water all lined up on my wall beautifully,
Oh.
just in case. After 9/11, I had my plastic wrap all in preparation. Like we were going to suffocate to death as we.
Well, it sounds like a strong self-preservation instinct of preparing for
So I've had my really with COVID. I like at my office to make uh, people wear masks. I went and bought all these beautiful masks.
Oh, and make them attractive.
And it did work,
That's
because
awesome.
people, not only would they put them on in the office, they would take a few home
That's
which,
great.
which
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
Um, and it
Yeah.
was because they were beautiful.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that because that's your attunement to beauty and art. It's just so wonderful, and just the way you create a space as kind of like an art museum, which it should be, right? I mean, if you walk in our house, you'll just see art, on all the walls, right? It's
Yeah,
kind
you
of
have them all the way down your wall.
that's right. But so maybe say a little bit about your relationship to beauty, because that's one of the attributes of type fours, and the healthier the better.
I like when I first started hanging my art on our wall. Um, to me, like this was like one of the biggest blessings of it. It's because I actually know I am not like an amazing artist. I'm not okay.
Hmm.
Um, and I would never hang art because it was never good enough.
Yeah.
And so part of my coming to accept who I really am was the idea of hanging mediocre art on the wall,
Yep.
and that it did not have to be uh, the best skill in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It just
Mm-hmm.
had to have heart.
Yeah, and that really comes through in your art, which is to me is the purest form. And vastly superior to all these technicians. But just the heart and color, the way you use color. It's also the way my wife uses it, Donna. Just as something it evokes the heart, which is really beautiful. So it must be one of the things that really fed you in your lifetime.
It is, but like the art in my office, it's about two things: about self-acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
and people miss that all the time, because
Oh,
they don't know that that was my original theme,
yeah,
uh, was
yeah,
to stop waiting to be perfect or the best or
yeah,
good enough,
yeah.
and that the idea that maybe we're all already good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And that's such a huge lesson for me as a type 4. Because there's this, the we often talk about the 4 having this kind of fantasy self or idealized self that if I'd been given all the opportunities, I would be this incredible person. And then, but look at me, I'm just kind of like a dirt clod on the road, and really, shaming myself through that imagination process. But that's a really powerful. That self acceptance it has been huge for me, and I think just thinking of Pema Chodron has been such a gift to me in terms of relaxing the armor of myself and just being with whatever's there. So, but that's my next adventure. I think Donna keeps trying to get me to do art with her, and I'm just like, well, I don't have any skill, so this may push me over the ledge, and so. Well, anything else you'd like to say about the Type 4 before we talk about your work?
Well, that's the main things that come to my mind is about um, self-acceptance. And I was gonna say to you, um, and I got this from Katie Byron,
Hmm.
or Byron Katie, whichever way.
I know I get them mixed up.
And it's about mediocrity,
Hmm.
that I think is important for me as a form. And one of the things she said one time that it really struck a chord with me is that in reality, almost everything we do in life is going to be mediocre.
So relax.
Yeah. And stop telling yourself, that you should be the best, and,
Yeah.
that you might be like really good at one or two things. But the truth is, if I can accept a little mediocrity, how much
Mm.
more relaxed and happy my life could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. She had one book I really loved, which is I think A Thousand Names for Joy.
Yeah.
Which really created a lot of spaciousness. So I like that. Well, so I'd love to hear about the work you've done, where you are with recovery, and just really a unique approach you guys have, you and your husband, around uh, creating a possibility for people to have more than one choice about where they go. So I wonder if you'd share a little bit about.
Well, and it's more than just one choice. So, and really, I think it started like with my own experience, like in AA and with the sponsorship. And I always tell people I kind of piecemealed my own recovery
Mm-hmm.
uh, together. And so, one of the big things I realized, like in the program, is that I think the first mistake we make is we say, are you an alcoholic or not? Are you an addict or not?
Yeah.
But my addiction and your addiction are very different.
Yeah.
And that to always say, make it an either or, we miss important complexity
Yeah.
and individuality of each person's addiction and therefore recovery.
Yeah.
And that, so we kind of break it down into 5 sections, which is trauma/shame, you
Yeah.
know,
Mm-hmm.
because some people actually don't have any genetics. They only have trauma and shame and maybe some depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And to treat that person the same. And I think those are the people that I know you've seen this too. There's been people in the program that were in the program for a long time and then they did go back and drink successfully.
Yeah, that happens.
And I think it's because they didn't really have the genetics.
Yes,
You know,
could
they
be.
had the behavior,
Mm.
and it's different.
Yeah,
And it really, we should bid them a fond farewell,
absolutely.
and job well done.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
one.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And then so there's people who have this genetic predisposition, which I'm included. I know you are too.
Yeah.
We just, we're not ever going to be able to drink again or use again,
Yeah. Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
But those people will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, to start looking at distinguishing between the two and stop trying to pull those people into our arena.
Yeah. 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 Put it like everything fits only one pot. So that's yeah. Yeah.
So, and then we look also like at, so we look at genetics and biology. The younger you start using, probably the more severe your addiction is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that we all know. And then we look at frequency, intensity, and duration, which that's pretty easy too. If you're
Mm-hmm.
using heroin every day, it really is more severe than if you're drinking every day
Yeah.
till the end.
Yeah.
Then drinking catches up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but there's a difference.
There is a difference.
And to treat it as the same, is a mistake.
Yeah.
And then we look at coexisting disorders, and even with that, like schizophrenia is way more severe than depression, and PTSD is more severe than depression and anxiety, and therefore those people are going to need more help than this person is.
Yeah.
And then our 5th leg is about physical issues, because what I started noticing is so many people's addiction started with an accident or with guys' sports, sports injuries in high school and stuff. And so that ends up having a lot of power in their addiction, chronic pain, especially these sports injuries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the other part with physical is just as we age, our bodies are more vulnerable and more things go wrong.
It's true. My dad said, "Old age is not for wimps." I said,
and he was right. So with our intensive inpatient, we look at all of that.
Yeah.
And therefore, because of that, like people with high genetics and stuff, they really seem to thrive in AA.
Yeah. Interesting.
But trauma people do not.
Yeah. Yeah. They probably get triggered. Their shame probably gets triggered a lot. Because, it's interesting. I think, at least in our little small universe of AA, the consciousness around not shaming people has gotten better and better and better, which makes it a much more human-friendly experience. But yeah, there's through the course of the years, it seemed like recovery used to really focus on shaming people to get them sober. Well, how's that working? It doesn't work, but we still keep doing it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I even think there's a place for healthy shame.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think if I steal $5 from you,
Mhm.
and I feel shame. That's going to keep me from stealing $5.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like it's the overuse of it. It's about making you feel bad as opposed to, oh, you've got a conscience. And
Yeah.
of course you feel, I mean, some of the things that I did under the influence, I felt a healthy shame, like, oh, and horror, like, oh
And
my God.
sadly, I will say some things I've done in recovery, I have felt some healthy shame about.
Absolutely. I'm always waiting for my next big mistake. So, yeah, yeah.
You know, sometimes I know I stick my foot in my mouth, and I think that's healthy shame.
Well, how have you worked with your, you know, beloved husband in terms of understanding? Like I can say in my life that sometimes if I go through a mood swing, Donna, being a type 2, will want to cheer me up. And cheering me up doesn't work very well as much as just saying, I can see you're suffering, anything I can do, and I'll just listen. And but as a 2, she wants to help me and comfort me, and for some reason I have an aversion to that until I get through the tidal wave. But so part of my educating her is that when I'm in some, you know, sometimes type 4s, when they're in a difficult place, it looks like they're going to jump off the ledge. And I've had to, you know, teach her, no, I'm just looking over the ledge. And, you know, you shouldn't look over with me because you'll get stuck there for 5 days when I walk away from it, right?
That's right.
So, yeah. So anything that comes up for you in particular?
You know, I think like with Steve being 6, when I'm moody, he doesn't try to caretake me out of it. He tries to debate me out of it.
That's great. Yeah, you don't need to be feeling this. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, bring some good debate and look at both sides. And yeah, well,
And
anything.
this, I will tell you, this is interesting with my husband because that really is how we bonded. And this will be political, but it is what happened. He was like ultra conservative ditto head,
Yeah.
and I was like an ultra liberal. Um, and we would debate it all the time. Like on our first dates, like we would debate, and really, eventually, I won. So I was like, it's okay.
You've convinced me. Will you marry me? Yeah. Oh, well, we got about a minute left, and you know, I was just thinking, um, you know, I'm in favor of whatever helps somebody get clean and sober, do that.
Me too.
And I don't know the way for you. I've used, you know, 10 different things. So it's a process of discovery, and I'm going to support you and be with you and see if we can find out what works for you. And it sounds like you're in the same camp. And
I am, and you know, it's interesting. We're doing a survey right now on the social media survey on just tools people use to get sober. And you know what the number one is?
what?
Music.
Music? Really?
Uh-huh.
And what do they say? Is there a context, a story around that?
No, but that would be good to get. But it's kind of I think it's like at 86%, like people have chosen that as one of their top um,
Tools.
tools. Yeah, is
Ah,
listening to music,
that's interesting.
isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's about the creative mind.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you know, music gets through all of the filters and can touch you on a deeper level. So, yeah,
Actually, self-help meetings is number 3. Number 2 is journaling.
really, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's great. So I look forward to seeing the published results when you. That's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Because
just something to think about because that's not
it's not promoted as
it's just
much.
not that's not what promoted, but really, you know, your auditory goes straight to the center brain, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. Well, I'd love to hear more about that. And so we are at the witching hour here. I just want to thank you so much. And, if you have more that you want to say about what you guys are doing with your work, I'd be glad to do a follow-up interview just to because I really want to get it out there. Hopefully people will find their way to something that really works. And but what do you call the system you use? Is it the matrix system or something?
The
Or
star matrix. Star
yeah,
matrix. That's five legs. That's put it in
yeah.
a star.
And you have a book that you've written on that, haven't don't you? That's on
I do.
Amazon.
I should have a copy of it. That's what a good promoter would.
I know. I'm always looking for my book. I go, yeah. Anyway, well, I will include that in the description underneath the interview so people can check it out. And then, I know you've written 4 or 5 other books, and so anyway, just thank you so much for being
Thank
here
you,
today.
Michael. It was
Yeah,
delightful to see you.
yeah, great to be with
And
you, and talk to you soon.
okay.
All right, now I'll turn this off, and let's see.